The mansion of the Albrights, imposing in its neoclassical architecture, stood alone in the most upscale neighborhood of Chicago. Its silent hallways echoed only the footsteps of Richard and the clicking paws of Max, his inseparable golden retriever, on the Italian marble floors. The walls, adorned with priceless works of art, bore mute witness to the lonely routine of that successful businessman. If this story has caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Tell us which city you're watching from, and let's continue. Richard gazed at the city through the window of his office on the top floor. At 45, he had built an impressive business empire, but he felt a void that no bank account could fill. His only true companion was Max, who followed him faithfully through every room of the house, like a golden shadow of joy amidst the melancholy of the surroundings. That autumn morning, as he walked through Millennium Park on his daily stroll with Max, Richard reflected on how his life had become a sequence of meetings and numbers. People admired him but kept their distance, intimidated by his status and wealth. Max was the only one who treated him with genuine joy, unconcerned with his titles or bank account. The walk was proceeding as usual when Max, always so disciplined, began to act strangely. His behavior changed suddenly as they passed near a group of playing children. The dog pulled on the leash with unusual force, something he had never done before. Richard, surprised by the animal's behavior, tried to calm him, but Max seemed hypnotized by something his owner couldn't understand. In a moment of distraction, while Richard answered an important business call, Max managed to break free. The businessman, desperate, watched his companion disappear among the park's trees. He immediately ended the call and ran after the dog, but Max had vanished completely. The following hours were filled with anguish. Richard cancelled all his appointments for the day and mobilized a search team. Flyers were posted throughout the area, offering a generous reward. Park staff and regular visitors were questioned, but no one had information about the golden retriever's whereabouts. As the days passed, the emptiness in the Albright mansion grew. The silence, once softened by Max's cheerful presence, became deafening. Richard could barely concentrate in meetings, his mind always returning to his missing companion. Nights were especially difficult when the dog's absence was most noticeable. In his desperation, Richard increased the reward and expanded the search area. He hired private investigators and sought help from all veterinary clinics and animal shelters in the Chicago metropolitan area. The story of the millionaire searching for his dog began to circulate in the local media, touching the hearts of many. Weeks passed without news, and hope began to fade. Richard realized he had never felt so vulnerable. All his money and influence seemed useless in the face of the impossibility of finding the one who had become his only true friend. One afternoon, while reviewing reports in his office, Richard received a call that would completely change the course of his story. An unknown voice on the other end informed him that Max had been found. The businessman's heart raced, but something in the tone of the call suggested the story was more complex than it seemed. The informant asked Richard to personally retrieve Max from a park near his residence. There was an important detail. Max had a small leather pouch hanging from his collar, containing a message that needed to be read carefully. Richard, without hesitation, grabbed his keys and drove to the indicated location, his heart pounding at the possibility of reuniting with his companion. The reunion in the park was emotional. Max, upon seeing Richard, ran toward him with his usual energy, wagging his tail and barking with joy. The businessman hugged his companion, feeling the weight of the past weeks of anguish dissolve in that moment. However, his attention was soon captured by the small brown leather pouch carefully tied around the animal's neck. With trembling hands, Richard untied the cord holding the pouch and pulled out a folded letter. The paper was simple, but the handwriting was delicate and careful. As he unfolded the message, his eyes scanned the first lines with growing interest. "Dear Mr. Richard, my name is Emily Carter, and I write this letter with a heavy but hopeful heart. I found your dog Max a few weeks ago on the side of the road connecting Chicago to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. He was disoriented and tired, probably after a long journey. I couldn't leave him there, especially when I realized he needed care. Destiny sometimes works in mysterious ways. Max appeared in our lives at a crucial moment. My son, Michael, just 10 years old, is battling a serious heart condition, and the past few months have been particularly difficult. Since Max arrived, however, I've witnessed an extraordinary transformation in my boy. Your dog's presence has brought light and hope to our modest home." Richard paused for a moment, looking at Max, who watched him with expressive eyes. How had the animal traveled so far? Lake Geneva was over 90 miles from Chicago. He resumed reading, each word increasing his curiosity about this improbable story. "I know you must be wondering why I kept Max for so long before returning him. The truth is, the bond between him and Michael became so special, so transformative, that each day I delayed the decision to look for his true owner. The doctors noticed significant improvements in Michael's tests and attribute part of it to the positive emotional state Max provided. I'm not asking to keep Max permanently. I know he's your companion and how much you must miss him. But I would like to make a request. Would it be possible to allow Michael to spend a little more time with Max? Perhaps a few weeks? I know it's a lot to ask, but seeing my son smile again after so long is priceless." The letter continued with details on how to find their home in Lake Geneva and ended with a sincere plea for understanding. Richard reread the message several times, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to simply take Max home and resume his normal life, but something in Emily's words touched him deeply. As he petted Max, he remembered his own loneliness, the emptiness he felt in his luxurious mansion. He thought of Michael, of how an animal could bring such transformation to a life. Max looked at him as if understanding the dilemma in his heart, as if knowing there was a greater purpose to his disappearance. That night, instead of returning to his mansion with Max, Richard made a decision that would change not only his life, but also the lives of several people. He made some calls, rearranged his schedule, and began planning a trip to Lake Geneva. He needed to meet Emily and Michael in person to better understand this story that seemed straight out of a book. In his hotel room, preparing for the trip the next day, Richard reflected on how a simple walk in the park had turned into something so unexpected. Max slept peacefully at the foot of the bed, oblivious to the transformations his adventure was about to trigger in the lives of everyone involved. The arrival in Lake Geneva felt like stepping into another world. The fresh air of the Wisconsin countryside, so different from Chicago's atmosphere, filled Richard's lungs as he drove his imported car along the cobblestone streets of the town. Max, in the passenger seat, seemed more animated with each mile closer to their destination, as if recognizing the way. Following the directions in the letter, Richard found Emily's house on a quiet street, surrounded by flowering trees. It was a modest home, with walls in need of a fresh coat of paint and a small garden in front, where a few flowers bravely resisted the chill of the countryside. The simplicity of the place contrasted sharply with his mansion in Chicago, but there was something comforting in its modesty. Before he could ring the doorbell, Max barked excitedly, and the door opened. Emily appeared, a woman around 35, with brown hair tied in a messy bun and eyes that carried a mix of exhaustion and determination. Upon seeing Max, her face lit up with a genuine smile, but her expression quickly turned apprehensive as she recognized Richard. "Mr. Albright," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't expect... not so soon. Please, come in." The interior of the house was as modest as the exterior, but impeccably organized. Photos of Michael decorated the walls, telling the story of a cheerful boy who had gradually been marked by illness. In one corner of the living room, an old piano covered with a thin layer of dust caught Richard's attention. "Michael is resting," Emily explained, leading them to the small kitchen. "The medications make him drowsy in the afternoon. Would you like some coffee?" "It's simple, but it's freshly brewed." As she prepared the coffee, Richard observed the details of the kitchen. He noticed medical prescriptions stuck to the refrigerator, alongside children's drawings where a golden dog frequently appeared. Max sat near the hallway door as if patiently waiting for something or someone. "Why didn't you contact me earlier?" Richard finally asked, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. The flyers were everywhere. The reward. Emily sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her own cup as if seeking comfort in the warmth of the drink. "At first I really planned to return Max immediately, but then Michael had one of his episodes and Max, he just knew what to do. He stayed by his side all night, offering comfort even the doctors couldn't provide." She paused, struggling to find the right words. "After that, every time I thought about returning Max, I saw my son smiling, playing, being a child again. The doctors noticed improvements in his tests, said his emotional state was positively affecting his physical condition. As a mother, Her explanation was interrupted by a sound from the hallway. Max immediately stood up, wagging his tail excitedly. A boy appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Michael was small for his age, with a pallor that betrayed his condition, but his eyes lit up when he saw Max. The dog ran to him, licking his face as the boy laughed, a sound that made Richard instantly understand why Emily had hesitated so much to return Max. There was a purity in that joy, a life force that seemed to defy the boy's physical fragility. "You must be Max's owner," Michael said, finally noticing Richard's presence. There was no fear or hesitation in his voice, just sincere childlike curiosity. "He told me about you." "He did he?" Richard replied, surprised by the softness in his own voice. "Yeah, he said you're nice, but really lonely." The boy's honesty hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "Is that true?" Emily tried to intervene, embarrassed by her son's frankness, but Richard raised his hand, signaling it was okay. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to be truthful. "Yes, Michael. Sometimes I feel very lonely." The boy considered the answer for a moment, then smiled. "Well, now you don't have to be lonely anymore. You can visit us and Max whenever you want. Right, Mum?" The simplicity and sincerity of Michael touched Richard deeply. Emily, sensing the emotional atmosphere, suggested they move to the back porch, where a small garden grew in improvised pots. The businessman noticed how every inch of that space was creatively and lovingly utilized, revealing a mother's effort to create a welcoming environment with limited resources. Michael, now more awake, began showing Richard his drawings. They were detailed illustrations of Max in various imaginary adventures, saving other animals, exploring magical forests, and even flying among clouds. The boy's vibrant imagination contrasted with his fragile appearance, and in every stroke there was a contagious hope. "This one is Max when he saved the hurt bird," Michael explained, pointing to one of the drawings. "And here's him helping me be strong like him." The drawing showed Max next to a small figure, clearly Michael, both wearing superhero capes. As he watched the interaction between Michael and Max, Richard noticed something about Emily. There was a soft melody she unconsciously hummed while arranging some pots. The musicality in her voice was remarkable, and it reminded him of the dusty piano in the living room. "Do you play?" Richard asked, gesturing toward the living room. Emily stopped for a moment, a flicker of emotion crossing her face. "I used to," she replied with a melancholic smile. "I was a professional pianist, actually. I performed in theaters, gave lessons, but that was in another life." The conversation was interrupted by Michael, who began coughing. Emily immediately rushed inside, returning with a glass of water and medication. The routine seemed well established. Michael took the medicine without complaint, while Max stayed close, like a watchful guardian. "Sorry," Emily said, turning her attention back to Richard. "Medication times are sacred." "Don't worry," Richard replied, watching how she managed everything with efficiency born of necessity. "It must be hard to handle everything alone." "You learn," she said, but her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "I work as a private music teacher when I can, do online translations. Anything that lets me stay home to care for Michael." At that moment, dark clouds began to form in the sky, heralding a typical countryside storm. Emily quickly started gathering clothes from the clothesline, while Michael and Max ran inside. Richard, without thinking twice, helped store the more fragile pots from the garden. The rain began to pour, and with it came revelations that would change the course of this story. As he helped protect the house from the storm, Richard discovered old sheet music stored in a box, original compositions by Emily that had never been performed. The evident talent in those pages made him question how much potential was being wasted there. Michael, now sitting on the couch with Max by his side, flipped through a photo album. "Look, Mum, when you played at the theater," he exclaimed, showing a photograph of Emily on stage, radiant in a gown, in front of a grand piano. The photo captured Richard's attention. It was from just a few years ago, but showed a completely different Emily. Confident, brilliant, fulfilled. The contrast with the woman now struggling to make ends meet and care for a sick child was poignant. The storm outside intensified, and with it grew an inner storm in Richard. His thoughts revolved around the coincidences, or were they signs, that had led Max to this family. How had his always well-behaved dog suddenly decided to run away and travel all that distance? Why, of all places, had he ended up in this house? A particularly loud clap of thunder made Michael flinch, and Max immediately moved closer, offering comfort. Emily rushed to close a banging window, and Richard noticed how some raindrops were already seeping through cracks in the roof. The house, though clean and organized, clearly needed repairs. The storm battering Lake Geneva seemed determined to show no mercy. Inside Emily's house, Richard watched as leaks multiplied, forcing an improvised choreography of buckets and basins across the floor. The businessman, accustomed to solving problems with the ease of signing a check, felt strangely powerless in the face of this situation. "This always happens when it rains hard," Emily explained, balancing another strategically placed bucket. "The roof has needed repairs for a while, but—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear in the medical bills stuck to the refrigerator. Michael, wrapped in a blanket on the couch with Max by his side, watched everything with attentive eyes. "Max doesn't like thunder," the boy commented, petting the dog, "but he pretends he's not scared to keep me company." Richard smiled, recognizing the innocent wisdom of the child. His gaze wandered around the room, stopping again at the covered piano. There was something about that silent instrument that seemed to tell a story of interrupted dreams. "Why don't you play anymore?" he asked Emily, who was trying to contain another leak. She paused for a moment, her hands still holding the mop. "It's not that simple," she replied, but her eyes betrayed a repressed desire. "The piano needs maintenance, and besides, Mom plays like an angel," Michael interrupted, excited. "She used to make people cry with emotion at the theaters. Everyone would stand and applaud." Emily blushed slightly. "Michael exaggerates. I had some talent, yes, but life took a different turn. Priorities changed." Richard approached the piano, carefully removing the cover that protected it. Despite the time without use, the instrument maintained a certain dignity. "May I?" he asked, indicating the keyboard lid. With Emily's hesitant nod, he opened the piano. Some keys were yellowed, others slightly misaligned, but there was still beauty in that imperfection. Max, interested by the movement, approached, followed by Michael. "Do you play too?" the boy asked, curious. "No," Richard replied, gently running his fingers over the keys without pressing them. "But I grew up listening to the piano. My mother was a music teacher." Something in Richard's voice made Emily approach. "Was?" "She had to stop playing when she got sick," he explained, his voice carrying an old sadness. "The piano in our house fell silent for years, until she—" His voice faltered and he didn't finish the sentence. A knowing silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of rain and occasional thunder. Max, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, gently nudged his nose against Richard's hand, offering the unique comfort only animals can provide. "You know," Michael said suddenly, "Max always stays near the piano when Mum is sad, like he wants her to play again." Emily looked surprised at her son. "You noticed that?" "Of course," the boy replied naturally. "It's like when he stays by my side during exams. He knows when we need help, even if we don't ask." Richard watched Max, remembering how the dog always seemed to know when he needed company during his lonely nights in the mansion. There was an instinctive wisdom in that animal that defied rational explanations. The storm outside began to intensify, and a new leak appeared, this time dangerously close to the piano. Emily rushed to protect the instrument, her concern evident on her face. "This piano," she began, while covering it with an improvised tarp, "was a gift from my father. He saved for years to give it to me when I entered the conservatory. I can't let it get ruined, but the house repairs are always more urgent." At that moment, a loud noise came from the roof, followed by the sound of rushing water. Emily paled, running toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Richard instinctively followed her, with Max close behind. Michael's room was being invaded by water leaking from the ceiling. Emily desperately tried to save her son's belongings, while Richard, without a second thought, began helping, moving furniture and protecting what he could with tarps and towels. Max, sensing the urgency of the situation, barked as if trying to alert them to each new leak. "The medications!" Emily suddenly exclaimed, running to a small dresser. There, stored in a drawer, were Michael's medications, some of them extremely expensive and essential for his treatment. Richard helped transfer everything to a safe place, noticing the number of bottles and their expiration dates, a silent reminder of the constant challenge this family faced. Michael watched everything from the doorway, hugging Max, his face a mix of worry and resignation that no child should carry. "Mum," he called softly, "it's okay. They're just things. The maturity in the boy's words struck Richard deeply. As he helped reorganize the room, he began to notice the small details that told the story of this family. Photos of happy moments in the park, drawings on the walls, a small trophy from a science fair, and child-friendly sheet music, fragments of a life that refused to surrender to adversity. "The forecast says heavy rain for the next 2 days," Emily commented, checking her phone with trembling hands. "I don't know if the roof will hold." Richard made a decision in that instant. "You can't stay here," he declared firmly. "I know a good hotel in the city center. I'll arrange a room for you until we can fix this." "I can't accept that," Emily replied immediately, her pride battling the evident need. "We've already taken so much by keeping Max for so long, and now—" "Please," Richard interrupted gently. "It's not just for you. Max would be devastated if he knew I left you in a situation like this." The dog, hearing his name, wagged his tail as if in agreement. Michael, who had approached, looked at his mother with pleading eyes. "Mom, Max is worried about us. You can see it in his eyes." Emily hesitated, looking at her son, at Max, and finally at Richard. There was something different in the businessman's gaze, a sincerity that went beyond simple charity. "All right," she finally agreed, "but just for tonight." As he helped the family gather their essentials for the night, Richard made a few calls. The first was to his trusted engineer in Chicago, asking him to come to Lake Geneva first thing the next morning. The second was to his assistant, requesting the cancellation of all his appointments for the week. At the hotel, one of the best in the area, Michael was amazed by the view of the countryside from their room. Max, already familiar with luxurious environments, seemed more interested in ensuring his young friend was comfortable, not leaving his side for a second. Emily, after settling Michael, found Richard on the hotel balcony. The rain continued to pour, but there, sheltered, they could watch the storm from a different perspective. "Why are you doing all this?" she finally asked. "You don't owe me anything. In fact, I'm the one who should—" "You know," Richard interrupted, his eyes fixed on the misty landscape. "For years I've been building companies, closing deals, accumulating wealth. But since I've been alone, none of it seems to have real meaning. Max was my only true connection to the world. When he disappeared, I realized how empty my life was." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "Then I discovered that my dog, of all things, found exactly the people who needed him, and maybe the people I needed to find too." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emily adjusted the shawl around her shoulders, trying to disguise her emotion. "When Michael was born," she began, her voice soft, "I had my whole life planned. International tours, concerts, a promising career ahead. Then in his first exams we discovered his heart condition. In an instant all those dreams had to be redirected." Richard listened attentively, realizing how this strong woman carried her own battles with admirable dignity. "You gave up everything for his health." "It wasn't a sacrifice," she replied with a sincere smile. "He's my son, but I admit that sometimes when I'm alone I miss the piano, the music. It's like a part of me is asleep." At that moment, a sound from Michael's room caught their attention. The boy was having a nightmare, something common due to his medications. Max was already in action, gently nudging his nose against Michael's face, offering the comfort only he knew how to give. Emily rushed to her son, and Richard watched in awe as Max and she worked in perfect harmony to calm Michael. The next morning, the engineer arrived early as requested. After a detailed inspection of Emily's house, the diagnosis was concerning. Besides the roof, there were structural issues that needed urgent attention. The cost of repairs would be significant. "I can't accept more help," Emily declared upon hearing the figures. "You've already done so much by offering us shelter last night." Richard, watching Max play with Michael in the hotel garden, had an idea. What if it's not help? What if it's an exchange? Emily looked at him, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "You're a talented pianist with international training. I have several social projects in Chicago that could benefit from music lessons. Besides, I'm planning to create a cultural foundation and would need someone with your expertise to coordinate the music department." Emily's eyes sparkled for a moment, but then concern returned. "But Michael, his doctors, I can't be away from him." "Lake Geneva has an excellent climate for Michael's recovery," Richard argued. "We can adapt everything, so you work mainly from here. traveling to Chicago only when necessary. And as for the doctors, he hesitated for a moment. I know the best specialists in the country. We can ensure Michael gets all the care he needs. Max, as if understanding the importance of the conversation, sat between them, looking from one to the other with that canine wisdom that seemed to grasp human hearts better than humans themselves. Look, Richard continued, I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a partnership. You have extraordinary talent that can help many people, and I have the resources to make it happen. As for Max, he smiled, watching the dog now playing with Michael, I think he's already decided he wants to be part of your lives. Emily watched her son laughing, a genuine laugh that had become more frequent since Max's arrival. Richard's proposal was tempting, not just for the financial help, but for the chance to reconnect with music, to do something meaningful. The repairs on Emily's house began immediately. Richard not only hired the best professionals in the area, but also made sure to personally oversee the project. With each passing day, he found more reasons to extend his stay in Lake Geneva, always with Max by his side, dividing his time between the mansion in Chicago and the small Wisconsin town. During the renovations, Emily and Michael continued to stay at the hotel, turning what was meant to be a temporary arrangement into a period of profound transformation. Every morning, Michael received visits from a specialized physical therapist recommended by his new doctors. Max actively participated in the sessions like a dedicated assistant, encouraging the boy through each exercise. One afternoon, while supervising the repairs, Richard discovered something special, hidden in an old trunk in the attic. A notebook of handwritten sheet music, original compositions by Emily. They were complex and emotional pieces that told stories through musical notes. One of them, titled Sonata for an Angel, had been composed when Michael was born. I can't believe you found this, Emily said when Richard showed her the notebook. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the yellowed pages. Years of composition. I thought I'd lost it during one of our moves. These are extraordinary works, Richard commented, having shown the sheet music to some professional musicians in Chicago. Did you know there are international composition competitions? Your work has the potential to... No, she interrupted gently. That was another life. Now I need to focus on Michael, on his recovery. What if you could do both? Richard asked. Michael is responding well to treatment. The doctors are optimistic, and music... Well, music has always been part of his life, hasn't it? As if to confirm his words, they heard laughter coming from the garden. Michael was sitting on the grass with Max drawing. When they approached, they saw he was creating a comic strip where Max was a musical dog playing piano in an orchestra. Look, Mom, Michael exclaimed, showing the drawing. Max is playing your music, the one you composed for me when I was a baby. Emily was surprised. How do you know about that song? Max told me, Michael replied, with the simplicity of a child. He said he hears you humming it when you're sad. Richard watched as Emily's eyes filled with tears. Max, sensing the emotion of the moment, gently pressed his head against her hand, as he always did when someone needed comfort. You know, Richard began, I've been thinking about bringing a piano here. The living room after the renovations will be perfect for a quality instrument. Michael could have his music lessons at home, and you... A piano? Michael interrupted, his eyes shining with excitement. Max will love it. He's always near the old piano, like he wants to hear music. Emily looked at her son, at Max, and finally at Richard. Something different was happening here, something that went beyond the simple generosity of a successful businessman. It was as if destiny through Max was weaving an elaborate tapestry, connecting lives that needed each other. Maybe, she began hesitantly, maybe I could play a little, just occasionally when Michael is doing his exercises. It might help with his recovery. And your performances, Michael added excitedly. Max told me you're going to play in theaters again. Max has been very talkative lately, Emily joked, but her smile betrayed deep emotion. The arrival of the new piano completely transformed the atmosphere of the renovated house. It was a magnificent instrument, personally chosen by Richard from one of the most prestigious stores in Chicago. The moment Emily played the first notes was etched in everyone's memory. Max, sitting beside the piano, kept his eyes fixed on her, as if he could see the music floating in the air. Michael, comfortably seated in a specially positioned armchair to watch the music sessions, looked at his mother with admiration. The melodies filling the house seemed to have a therapeutic effect, not just on the boy, but on everyone who heard them. Max often lay near the piano, closing his eyes during the performances, like a canine music critic appreciating every note. "It's amazing how music affects the environment," Richard commented one afternoon, as Emily practiced one of her old compositions. "It's like the house has come to life." Emily paused, her hands hovering over the keys. "You know, when Michael was very young, before we discovered his condition, I used to play for him every night. I believe music has always had a special effect on his heart." As if to confirm her words, Michael's latest test results showed significant improvement. The doctors, though cautious, were optimistic about his response to the new treatment. The more joyful atmosphere at home, combined with Max's constant presence and the music therapy sessions, seemed to be creating the perfect scenario for his recovery. One day, while organizing her old sheet music, Emily found an incomplete composition. It was a piece she had started writing when she first learned of Michael's condition, but had never had the courage to finish. Max, who was nearby, approached and rested his head on her lap, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "It's time to finish this," she murmured, more to herself than to Max. "Michael deserves to hear the end of this story." The following weeks were filled with intense musical creation. Emily worked on the composition during the afternoons, while Michael did his physical therapy exercises. Max divided his time between accompanying the boy and lying near the piano, as if supervising the creative process. Richard, who now spent more and more time in Lake Geneva, watched in awe as Emily transformed. Music had brought a special sparkle back to her eyes, an energy that radiated to everyone around her. He often found himself inventing excuses to extend his stay, postponing commitments in Chicago just to attend the music sessions. One evening, after Michael had gone to bed, Emily invited Richard to listen to the completed composition. It was an extraordinary piece, starting with melancholic notes representing the moment of Michael's diagnosis, but gradually transforming into a melody of hope and triumph. "It's his story," Emily explained as she played. "Our story. And now somehow your story too." Max, lying near the piano, lifted his head during the performance, his eyes moving between Emily and Richard, as if sensing something the humans hadn't yet realized. "It's incredible," Richard said, genuinely moved. "You need to share this with the world. People need to hear this story." Emily hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready to return to the stage. It's been so long." "Mom!" Michael's voice came from the doorway. He was in his pajamas with Max immediately by his side. "You have to play. Max told me your music will help other sick people too." The idea of returning to the stage stirred conflicting emotions in Emily. On one hand, her artist's heart yearned for the chance to share her music, especially now that her compositions carried such a profound and meaningful story. On the other, her concern for Michael and his condition still occupied the forefront of her thoughts. Richard, sensing her hesitation, began working discreetly behind the scenes. Through his connections, he arranged a small benefit concert at the local theater in Lake Geneva. The proceeds would go to the town's hospital, specifically the children's ward. It was the perfect way to unite Emily's music with a meaningful cause. "We don't need to start with something big," he explained, showing her the plans. "It can be intimate, family-like. Lake Geneva has a welcoming audience, and you're practically part of the community now." Max, who was nearby during the conversation, wagged his tail enthusiastically, showing his approval. Michael, playing with his drawings on the living room rug, looked up with interest. "Can I help with the performance?" the boy asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Max and I can be your assistants." Emily couldn't help but smile. It was impossible to resist her son's enthusiasm, especially now that he was showing so much energy and vitality. His latest tests had been promising, and the doctors were optimistic about his progress. "Maybe," she began, still hesitant, "maybe we could do something special. That composition about your journey. We could perform it along with your drawings." The idea quickly caught fire. Michael began creating a series of illustrations that told his story through Max's eyes. They were touching drawings showing the dog as a guardian, a loyal friend who accompanied him through his battles with illness. Richard, impressed by the boy's artistic talent, suggested the illustrations be digitized and projected during the musical performance. "It would be a multi-sensory experience," he explained. music and visual art complementing each other to tell a story of hope. The project began to take shape. The Lake Geneva community, hearing about the initiative, rallied to help. The theatre owner offered the space free of charge, local businesses volunteered to promote the event, and even the church choir offered to participate in some of the pieces. Emily spent hours practicing at the piano, perfecting each note. Max maintained his faithful vigil beside the instrument, sometimes lifting his head and howling softly in harmony with certain melodies, making everyone laugh. One afternoon, while rehearsing a particularly emotional passage, Emily noticed something different in Richard's behavior. He was quieter than usual, watching her with an intensity that made her blush slightly. "Is something wrong?" she asked, stopping her playing. "On the contrary," he replied, his voice soft. "I was just thinking about how life takes interesting turns. A few months ago, I was just a lonely businessman in an empty mansion. Now," he paused, looking at Max playing with Michael in the garden, "now I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was searching for." Emily felt her heart race. There was something in Richard's words, in the way he looked at her and Michael, that suggested much more than simple philanthropy. Max, as if sensing the delicate moment, entered the room and sat between them, looking from one to the other with that canine wisdom that seemed to understand human hearts better than humans themselves. The night before the performance, Lake Geneva was alive with anticipation. Posters of the event were scattered throughout the town, and tickets had sold out within days. The story of Emily, Michael, and Max had touched the hearts of the community, and everyone wanted to be part of this special moment. The theatre underwent minor renovations and adaptations to host the show. Richard had arranged for a state-of-the-art projection system to display Michael's illustrations, and a magnificent grand piano had been specially transported for the occasion. Max accompanied every technical visit as if he were the official project supervisor. During one of the rehearsals, something unexpected happened. Michael, who was watching his mother play while drawing, began humming a melody. It was a simple but beautiful tune he had created for Max. Emily stopped playing, surprised by her son's musical talent. "Michael, that's beautiful," she exclaimed, moved. "Did you compose that yourself?" "Max helped me," the boy replied naturally. "He makes those funny sounds when I'm drawing, and the music just came to me." Richard, who was watching the rehearsal, had an idea. "What if we included that song in the performance? We could create a special moment with Michael singing his composition for Max." The suggestion caused immediate excitement. Michael was thrilled at the possibility of actively participating in the show, and Max showed his approval with enthusiastic barks. Emily, though initially concerned about the energy it would take from Michael, couldn't resist her son's excitement. In the days that followed, mother and son worked together to develop the arrangement of the song. Emily was impressed by Michael's musical intuition, his ability to create melodies that perfectly expressed his feelings. Max remained close during rehearsals, sometimes lying near the piano, other times beside Michael, as if supervising the creative process. Richard, in turn, spent more and more time with the family. His trips to Chicago became shorter and less frequent. His associates noticed the change in his demeanor. He seemed lighter, happier. The mansion in Chicago, once his solitary refuge, now felt too large and empty. On the eve of the performance, while Michael slept under Max's watchful eye, Emily found Richard on the balcony gazing at the town's lights. She sensed something was troubling him. "Is something wrong?" she asked, joining him. Richard remained silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Since Max brought me to you, I've been thinking a lot about the meaning of family, of home. My life has always been focused on building a business empire, on accumulating wealth. But here, in this small town with you," he paused, searching for the right words. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. There was something in Richard's voice, a vulnerability she hadn't noticed before. Max, who had quietly joined them on the balcony, looked from one to the other with that wise expression that seemed to say he knew exactly what was happening. "Lake Geneva has changed you," she said softly. "It wasn't Lake Geneva," he replied, turning to face her. "It was you." Max knew exactly what he was doing when he decided to run away that day in the park. He understood something I took too long to realize. The night was exceptionally clear, with a starry sky that seemed to bless the eve of the performance. On the balcony, the silence between Emily and Richard was heavy with unspoken expectations. Max, sitting between them, kept his attentive gaze as if waiting for the right moment. What did Max understand? Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard took a deep breath, gathering courage. That I needed a family more than an empire. That all my achievements meant nothing without someone to share them with. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. Max didn't get lost that day, he found me. Emily felt her heart race. Richard's words echoed feelings she herself had been trying to understand in recent weeks. The way he cared for Michael, how he genuinely seemed to care about his well-being, went far beyond simple generosity. Tomorrow, Richard continued, you'll take that stage and show the world your incredible talent. Michael will sing the song he composed, and I'm sure it will move everyone. But before that happens, I need to say something. Max stood up at this moment, as if wanting to give them more privacy, but stayed close, watching attentively. Since I lost my wife, Richard continued, his voice choked with emotion, I thought I'd never be able to feel certain things again. I threw myself into work, built companies, accumulated wealth, but it was all empty. Max was my only real connection to the world. Then he brought me to you and everything changed. Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. She too had built walls around herself, focusing solely on Michael and his recovery, setting aside any possibility of personal happiness. Richard, Please, he interrupted gently, let me finish. I'm not here just for Max or just to help with Michael's treatment. I'm here because for the first time in many years, I feel like I've found a place where I belong. A family. At that moment, a sound from Michael's room caught their attention. The boy had woken up and was standing at the balcony door, with Max immediately by his side. Are you guys dating? Michael asked with the innocence of a child, making the adults blush. Michael, Emily exclaimed, embarrassed. You should be sleeping. Max told me something important was happening, the boy replied naturally. He always knows things. Richard couldn't help but smile. It was incredible how Michael attributed an almost supernatural wisdom to Max, and even more incredible, how the dog seemed to truly understand everything happening around him. Actually, Michael, Richard began, approaching the boy, I wanted to ask you and your mom a very important question. Emily felt her heart race even more. Max, by her side, gently pressed his head against her hand, as if wanting to give her strength for what was coming. Would you accept, Richard paused, choosing his words carefully, to be part of my life permanently? Not as friends I've helped, but as a real family? The silence that followed Richard's question was broken by the sound of Max wagging his tail against the balcony floor. Michael, with the unique perception of children, was the first to react. You mean you're going to be my dad? He asked, his eyes shining with hope. Max told me you would be. Emily, still processing the magnitude of the moment, felt tears streaming down her face. All the barriers she had built over the years, all the defenses erected to protect her heart, seemed to melt away at the sincerity in Richard's eyes. Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling. Our life isn't simple. Michael needs constant care, and That's exactly why I'm sure, Richard interrupted gently. You've taught me the true meaning of family, of unconditional love. All my business success seems small compared to what you achieve every day with your strength and determination. Max, as if wanting to be part of the moment, nudged Michael toward Richard. The boy didn't hesitate, hugging him with all the strength his little arms could muster. I knew it, Michael exclaimed. Max always says you have a big heart like his. Emily watched the scene, her heart overflowing with emotion. The way Richard hugged Michael, the genuine affection in his gestures, the dedication he had shown since day one. Everything indicated that Max truly knew what he was doing when he decided to bring their lives together. I don't expect an immediate answer, Richard said, still holding Michael. I know it's an important decision, one that affects many lives, but I want you to know that my heart has already chosen you as my family. But Mom, Michael protested, Max already decided we're going to be a family, and he's never wrong. Emily couldn't help but smile through her tears. It was true that Max seemed to have a special wisdom, a unique ability to understand human hearts. Since his mysterious arrival, he had transformed their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Tomorrow is a big day, Richard continued, his voice soft. You're going to shine on that stage, Emily. You'll show the world your extraordinary talent. And after, he paused significantly, after we'll have all the time in the world to build our story together. if you'll have me." Max, who had stayed close during the entire conversation, approached Emily and rested his head on her lap, looking up at her with those expressive eyes that seemed to say, "Trust your heart." "You know," she began, stroking Max's head, "I've spent so much time focused just on survival, on making sure Michael had the care he needed, that I forgot what it was like to dream of something more. Then Max came into our lives, bringing not just hope, but also you." Michael, still hugging Richard, looked eagerly at his mother, as if he perfectly understood the importance of this moment. The full moon illuminated the balcony, creating an almost magical atmosphere, as if the universe itself was conspiring for this meeting of souls. The next day, the Lake Geneva Theatre had never been so full. The entire community seemed to have mobilized for the event, and even people from neighboring towns came to support the performance. The lobby was decorated with some of Michael's most touching illustrations, telling the story of Max through a child's eyes. Backstage, Emily adjusted the midnight blue dress Richard had specially ordered for the occasion. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the sheet music on the piano. Max, wearing an elegant bow tie, stayed by her side like a faithful guardian. Michael, dressed in a small suit that made him look even more adorable, rehearsed his song one last time. His childish voice, filled with genuine emotion, echoed backstage, making the theater staff stop to listen. "Are you nervous?" Richard asked, approaching Emily. He looked handsome in his dark suit, but there was something different in his demeanor, a softness that replaced his usual businesslike formality. "A little," she admitted. "It's been so long since my last performance, and now with everything that's happening—" Max nudged her hand with his nose, as he always did when he sensed her anxiety. The simple gesture brought a smile to her lips. "You know," Richard said, "when Max ran away that day in the park, I was desperate. I thought I'd lost my only true friend. But now I understand he wasn't running away. He was guiding me to where I needed to be." Before Emily could respond, Michael came running over, followed by a nurse Richard had hired to accompany him during the event. "Mom, you're going to be amazing," the boy exclaimed, hugging her. "Max said everyone's going to cry because of the music." The murmur of the audience began to grow. The theater was packed, and the anticipation was palpable. Among the attendees were Michael's doctors, several Lake Geneva residents who had witnessed the family's transformation over the past months, and even some prominent figures from the music world discreetly invited by Richard. The theater director gave a signal. It was time. Emily took a deep breath, looking at the 3 people and 1 dog who had completely changed her life. Max wagged his tail as if saying, "You've got this." Michael smiled, his eyes shining with pride. And Richard? Richard looked at her with so much love that words became unnecessary. The lights began to dim, and an expectant silence filled the theater. In the front row, Richard and Michael settled in, with Max sitting obediently between them. The black grand piano gleamed under the spotlights, waiting to come alive under Emily's fingers. When she finally walked onto the stage, there was a collective pause. She was no longer just Michael's devoted mother or the pianist who had abandoned her career. She was a reborn artist, ready to share her story of love, resilience, and hope through music. The first notes of the composition she had created for Michael filled the space. On the screen behind her, Michael's illustrations began to appear, visually telling the story the music narrated. Max, in the front row, kept his eyes fixed on her, as if absorbing every note. Emily's music filled every corner of the theater, telling a story that went far beyond the notes. The projections of Michael's drawings showed Max in different moments, comforting the boy during treatments, playing in the garden, lying beside the piano. Each image, perfectly synchronized with the melody, created a unique and emotional experience. When it was time for Michael's special participation, the audience was already completely captivated by the magic of the performance. The boy climbed onto the stage with surprising confidence, Max walking majestically by his side. Emily adjusted the microphone to her son's height, and the first chords of the song he had composed began to play. Michael's crystal-clear voice, singing about his furry friend who brought light to his life, immediately moved the audience. Max, sitting beside the piano, began to howl softly in harmony with the music, eliciting emotional smiles from everyone present. This wasn't just a musical performance, it was a testament to love, hope, and the transformative power of true connections. In the front row, Richard watched the scene with his heart overflowing. Seeing Emily and Michael shine on stage, sharing their art and their story with the world, made him realize even more deeply how much his life had changed since Max decided to get lost that day in the park. The most touching moment of the night came when Emily began to play the composition she had recently finished, the one she had started writing when she learned of Michael's condition and had only now found the courage to complete. The music told the story of a mother and her son, their struggles, fears, and hopes, but it also spoke of new beginnings and second chances. As she played, images of Michael at different stages of his life were projected: his first steps, his first drawing, moments in the hospital, and finally, recent pictures of him smiling, playing with Max and with Richard. The transformation was visible not just in the photos, but in the music itself, which evolved from melancholic notes to a melody full of hope and joy. Max, who had returned to the front row after Michael's performance, kept his eyes fixed on the stage, as if he understood every note, every emotion conveyed through the music. From time to time, he glanced at Richard as if to confirm that his plan had worked. At the end of the performance, as the final notes echoed through the theater, there was a moment of absolute silence before the audience erupted into applause. Emily and Michael, hand in hand on stage, received a standing ovation that seemed endless. Max, unable to contain his own emotion, began barking joyfully, making everyone laugh through their tears. Richard climbed onto the stage, carrying a large bouquet of white roses. His eyes met Emily's, and in that moment, in front of the entire town of Lake Geneva, he knelt down. Max, as if he had rehearsed, approached carrying something in his collar, a small blue velvet box. The entire theater held its breath. Michael, who obviously knew about the plan, jumped with joy beside his mother. Emily, tears in her eyes, looked back and forth between Richard and Max, who sat elegantly beside the businessman, like a proud best man. The Lake Geneva Theater, that small stage in the Wisconsin countryside, was now witnessing a moment that transcended any musical performance. Richard, kneeling before Emily, with Max faithfully by his side holding the small blue box, represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with an apparently accidental escape in a Chicago park. "Emily," Richard began, his voice choked with emotion, "when Max disappeared that day, I thought I had lost my only friend. I didn't know I was about to gain an entire family. You and Michael didn't just bring music back into my life. You taught me the true meaning of love, courage, and hope." Max, as if understanding the solemnity of the moment, sat even straighter, holding the box with an almost human dignity. Michael, beside his mother, could barely contain his excitement. "I know I'm not perfect," Richard continued, "that I have much to learn about being a father, about family. But if you'll have me, I promise to dedicate every day of my life to making you happy." Max already chose our destiny. He knew before any of us that we belonged together. Emily, tears streaming down her face, looked at her son, who nodded energetically, at Max, who wagged his tail in approval, and finally at Richard, who waited with his heart in his hands. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." The entire theater erupted in applause and cheers. Max, in his excitement, jumped on the two of them, nearly knocking over the box with the ring. Michael ran to hug everyone, forming a knot of love and joy in the middle of the stage. Months later, the house in Lake Geneva was unrecognizable. Completely renovated, it now housed not just the family, but also a small music school where Emily taught children from the area. The piano, always tuned, was the heart of the home, and its melodies filled the rooms daily. Michael, growing stronger and healthier, divided his time between music lessons with his mother and veterinary studies, his new dream, inspired by Max. The doctors couldn't hide their surprise at the positive evolution of his heart condition. Richard found a new purpose for his fortune, creating a foundation that combined music and health treatments for children. The project, inspired by Michael's story, had already helped dozens of families. Max, of course, remained the family's faithful guardian. Sometimes, when everyone was gathered in the living room with Emily at the piano, Michael drawing, and Richard admiring his family, Max would look at each of them with that wise expression that seemed to say, "I always knew." On a particularly beautiful afternoon, as the family enjoyed a picnic in the garden, Michael made an observation that perfectly summed up their story. "You know," he said, petting Max, Some people think it was a coincidence that Max found us. Always attentive, always present, as if knowing his mission had been successfully completed. But I know the truth. He's a four-legged angel, sent to bring together hearts that were lost and needed to find each other. Emily and Richard exchanged an emotional glance, while Max, lying on the grass between them, closed his eyes contentedly, as if smiling, knowing his mission of love was complete. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Max, the four-legged angel who united lonely hearts, has touched your souls. To continue following stories that make us believe in the power of love and hope, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Also, share in the comments stories of special animals that have transformed your lives. After all, sometimes it's our four-legged friends who best understand the path to happiness. We'll be back soon with more heartwarming stories.